Hi, we'll be starting in a moment. Just want to allow everyone to join us. Welcome, everyone. We will be starting the program in just a minute or two. Okay, I know a few of you are still joining us, but I'm going to try to keep us on time today. My name is Amy Sherman, and I am the Midwest Advocacy Director at Compassionate Choices. I want to thank all of you for joining us today for Approaching End of Life Perspectives from a Doctor, Lawyer, and Faith Leader. Now, I know this title sounds like the start of a bad joke, and I've been teased about it, but I assure you this topic is serious and quite interesting. I want to thank the Chicago Public Library for co-authoring this program with Compassionate Choices. The CPL is the largest public library in our state and is truly a gem in our community. So very much appreciate this collaboration. My organization, Compassionate Choices, is a national nonprofit with a strong presence in Illinois, where I live. We work to improve the quality of care and expand options at the end of life. Our goal is to promote a person-directed approach to healthcare. Today's program very much falls within our vision. We will be exploring end-of-life issues from various perspectives. Panelists will share a little about themselves and then engage in a facilitated discussion. There will be a question period, time permitting. Feel free to add questions in the Q&A below. Hopefully we'll get some time to get to some of them. Next slide, please. Just want to remind everyone that this presentation is being recorded. We will be sending it to everyone who registered for this program. So if you have people that you know who signed up and weren't able to make it, they will get an opportunity to hear it. I'd like to just now introduce our panelists. Next slide, please. So we have with us, and I'm thrilled by it, Reverend Dr. Christal Bell. She is the Pediatric Staff Chaplain and ACH Bereavement Coordinator in the Mission and Spiritual Care at Advocates Children's Hospital in Oak Lawn. We also have Eric Parker, who is a partner in status in Baird. Eric is also a very active volunteer at Compassionate Choices and leads our statewide attorney action team. And we also finally have Dr. Shellie Williams, Associate Professor, University of Chicago Medicine, and also she serves as Medical Director at Montgomery Place. And we're going to hear about all of this. And in fact, what I'd like to do is turn this over right now to Dr. Williams so she can just tell us a little bit about herself. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Compassionate Choices, for the opportunity to talk about this important topic. And thank you to my fellow panelists, as well as the attendees at this evening's conference. I am a physician who practices both geriatrics as well as palliative medicine. I've been practicing for a little over 20 years now. And what I've learned in my years of practice is that end of life is the one point in our lives that we have choice. We don't get to choose how we come into this world. Some people even feel as if throughout the course of their life, they don't really have as many choices as they want. But definitely end of life is a time that you can be very clear about who you are, what you value, and what you would like for your final days and your final hours to be like. And a big part of expressing that choice is being really clear with your clinician team, whether it's your primary physician or your consultants that provide care, being really clear with your family members and those who love you, whether it's your friend group who creates a family for you. It's really a gift that you as an individual can provide to all of those who know you, love you, are involved in your care, when you're clear about what your wishes are, where you'd want to be when you take your last breath, who you want to have by your side, what kind of care is appropriate versus inappropriate. Because one of the tragedies that I've seen very often in my practice, whether it's in a hospital setting and sometimes even in a nursing home setting, is that many people who didn't take time to express those wishes and those values to their healthcare team and to their family members, they oftentimes got care that they never would have wanted. They oftentimes didn't see their last breath be one surrounded by family or be surrounded by people that they love. So if anything you take from this conference, I'm hoping it's that when you talk about what's important to you at end of life and what kind of care is important to you, that you share those wishes with your clinician team and also your family and your friends. It truly is a gift. I'm going to now pass on the torch to Attorney Eric Parker.
Thanks so much, Dr. Williams. I'm also very happy to be here tonight. My name is Eric Parker. I work with the law firm of Stoddis & Barrett in Chicago. And as Amy mentioned, I'm also a volunteer with Compassion and Choices. I am an elder law attorney. And for those of you who haven't heard of an elder law attorney before, it's a relatively new descriptor for an attorney. We do a lot of things. It includes things like wills and trusts and helping people through the probate process, but also guardianship and a variety of other things. One of the responsibilities of being an elder law attorney is that we often are helping people through the process of dying or a family member dying. And it's a big responsibility, but it's also an honor. And I like to think that one of the most important things I do is sort of help people through that process. The first part of that is making sure that their wishes are clear, that they are getting the medical care that they want by setting forth their wishes legally in advance, and that they are not getting medical care that they do not want. But also to make sure that their finances are being handled, that their decisions are being made by the person that they want to make those decisions, and also to be around for their family after they pass away and make sure that their assets and their property passes to the people they want. Some families even have a child who has a disability or special needs, and sometimes I then am involved in making sure that their family is taken care of going forward. So that's a little bit of what I do, and I'm so glad you're all here tonight because you have a great opportunity now to plan for the end of your life. Unfortunately, we don't get to choose not to pass away, but at least we can have a hand in what that looks like and what legacy we're leaving for our family. So I am going to go ahead and pass on then to Reverend Dr. Christal Bell.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here with all of you all tonight. As Attorney Parker said, I am Reverend Dr. Christal Bell. I am a chaplain at the Advocate Children's Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. And primarily my work is working with families, specifically at end of life. I'm also the bereavement coordinator for the Children's Hospital. And so I work well with the interdisciplinary team, with social workers, with music therapists, with physicians, nurses, respiratory therapy, to really help to create the sacred space that patients are wanting during their end of life time. It's important to have these conversations, not when you get to the place of when you're actually at the end of life and or when your health is declining, but it's actually important to have these conversations now. These conversations should happen at any age, and just really exploring what kind of quality of care you would like, what quality of care would you like to stop, and what kind of lifestyle you would like to actually have at your last moments. I know this could be a conversation that could be a little scary, but it's a conversation we really all need to have to honor and to respect the dignity of life for all persons, and to make sure that we're honoring what they would like. I'll now pass it back over to Amy. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank all of you for sharing your insights. I do want to ask you all, because it seems like there's a lot of overlap in terms of theme, and I think it's really interesting that from all of your vantage points, you kind of see the same thing, which is prepare and communicate and identify and document. And so appreciate getting those messages across. Eric, I wanted to ask you maybe a little bit in terms of just being more concrete. In your role as an elder law attorney, how do you see people preparing well for the end of life? What are things they can be doing specifically?
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is, when we have a panel like this where we talk about death, a lot of times people think, well, I don't really want to spend a lot of time thinking about death. And I can say, you really don't have to. The planning that you need is something that is important to do, but you can get through it pretty quickly and then go on with your life. In my opinion, there's really 4 things that are critical as far as planning for the end of your life. And they are in order of importance. That is a power of attorney for healthcare, a power of attorney for property, a discussion with your family, and a will. From a lawyer perspective, those are really the most important things. There are other things, and we can touch on them, but I'll just run through those very quickly because I want to keep this nice and brief. A power of attorney for healthcare is a document that names a person to make healthcare decisions if you're not able to do it yourself. Everybody who's over the age of 18 should have one. The older you are, the more urgent it is, but really everybody should have one. And that document also gives you an opportunity to set forth what you would want in terms of care at or near the end of your life. Would I want to be kept alive in a vegetative state? Would I want them to conduct interventions if I'm very near the end of life? Those types of questions. And it sets forth your opinion about those things so that your doctors know what you want and they can then follow your wishes. A power of attorney for property is a document that allows you to name someone to manage your finances for you. They call it property, but basically it means your money. So if you become disabled during your lifetime, somebody can step in and pay your bills, make sure your care is paid for, make sure your money is being managed properly. These 2 documents really don't involve death. They are documents that apply while you're alive, but they are really the most important things, and they are both very low cost. You can often do it through an agency, you can do it through a number of services. Even if you use a lawyer, they're not terribly expensive. If you do not do them, you could wind up having your family have to go to guardianship court and have a judge make these decisions instead of somebody that you choose. So they're really that critical. The third item is a discussion with your family. These documents are good on their own, but you don't want to surprise somebody by naming them your healthcare power of attorney. They need to know in advance that they're the person, and they also need to know what your attitude is about these things. If you don't tell them, I do not want to be kept alive on a machine, they are going to have to try to guess what you wanted. And it can be really a gut-wrenching decision for people to try to make that decision in the absence of you having told them. And if you name one child or a friend as your agent and you don't tell your other family members that you've done that or what you want, they may think that that person is not making the decision you want. So you want to fill out the form, but then you want to tell the people that you love in your life who are going to be around at that time, this is what I want, and this is who I decided will make that decision. And that's probably the best thing you can do. The last thing I'll mention, and I'm mentioning it fourth on purpose, is a will. It is important who gets your property after you die, and you want it to be the way that you want it. So I don't want to minimize that, but out of the things I just mentioned, that's, perhaps the least important. Nevertheless, you should definitely do it. A lot of people don't do it because they're worried about the cost of hiring a lawyer. But as we'll talk about a little later today, there are alternatives. There are other things we can talk about in terms of trusts and other things you've heard about. And those are mostly geared towards avoiding the probate system or reducing the cost of passing your assets to people. And they're great. I spend a lot of time doing that. I'd always be happy to talk to you about it. But if I had 5 minutes, and I do, I would tell you, get a power of attorney for healthcare, property, and a will, and you will have improved your situation dramatically.
Can you do me a favor, Eric, and also just say, is there a difference between an advance directive and a power of attorney? A lot of people get confused about that. And can you just briefly also say what a post is? 'Cause
Yes,
people talk
absolutely.
about that too.
Yeah. So advance directive is another word or another term to describe powers of attorney. It just means that you're setting forth your wishes in advance. And a post used to be known as a do not resuscitate order. It is for people who are near the end of life, perhaps in nursing home care, perhaps with a terminal condition. And they can fill it out saying, if my heart stops, I don't want them to resuscitate me. It also can set forth specific treatments you would want to refuse. So definitely a good thing to do. I will mention that if you have a power of attorney for healthcare, your agent can enter into that post when the time comes. But if you are competent and you know you're at that point, you can also do it. That is not done by a lawyer. It's done by a patient in conjunction with their doctor. And doctors are very good at describing that to them, especially if asked. So know that you should ask.
Thank you so much. I could talk to you forever on this, but we've got to keep moving. So I'm going to just ask Dr. Williams, how can people better partner with their physicians in their end of life care? And, what are some of the healthcare considerations that people should understand in advance?
Sure. I think one of the important things is for doctors and patients and families to normalize the process of talking about end of life care. We screen individuals for their blood pressures. If they've got a history of hypertension, we screen for diabetes levels. If someone has diabetes, we should do the same thing for end of life care. It should be a normal part of our day-to-day work with patients, and they shouldn't in any way feel like we're singling them out or we think they're actively dying because we start having the conversation. I think the best time to talk about this discussions is when someone's in a good state of health, because very often when you're in a good state of health, you're in a clearer state of mind about who you are, what you value, and what types of physical function, what setting of care is acceptable to you as life goes on. And many people, feel uncomfortable discussing those sort of things with their family, their friends, even with their physicians. But the only way to sort of gain an understanding of who someone is, and for a physician to be able to give good recommendations about what kind of care is appropriate, is to have a discussion about your values, who you are, what's important to you, and what sort of things are inappropriate as far as your care at end of life. Those are, statements and discussions that should occur on a regular basis. So normalize value system discussion. I think another thing that is really helpful for physicians and patients to partner on is involving someone who knows and loves the patient in the discussions. It shouldn't just be in silo with the patient. I encourage patients to bring in a family member, bring in a friend, so that we can discuss this together, so that that person who's chosen as your power of attorney or your advocate has a clear idea of what your medical conditions are and what kind of care is appropriate and what might be the results of things like resuscitation, given the complexity of your medical problems. Those are really important things to do. And then lastly, I think something that's overlooked a lot of the times is what I mentioned in the beginning. This truly is a gift, and it makes things so much easier for your loved ones. It makes things so much easier for your healthcare team if you sat down and had many of these discussions I can't tell you how many patients felt like it was a relief to be able to tell someone who they are and what they value, because they oftentimes feel like they can only do it with the attorney, or it's only going to be important at end of life. But when we get there, it's so much chaos going on. And oftentimes individuals are too ill or too lethargic to be able to express their wishes. So doing this at a point of health is critical to really be able to get out your wishes. And just as Attorney Parker mentioned, you know, when you're establishing many of these documents, whether it's a post form or an advance directive that outlines your living will wishes, that's a time for you to really be able to document, if my breathing stopped, I do want to go on a breathing machine versus I don't. That's a good time to be able to even express, if my kidneys are failing, I would want to go on dialysis or I wouldn't. Or a good time for you to be able to express, if my heart stops, that means that I've naturally died. I want to die naturally versus someone defibrillating or shocking my heart, or someone doing chest compressions. So these discussions are gifts, and they shouldn't be taken lightly. They should be a normal part of the flow with someone's clinician team. And the only way that can happen is if we as the public feel it's normal, and physicians make it a normal part of their interactions.
Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more with everything you said. I want to shift now to Reverend Dr. Bell, just to ask, what role do you play as a chaplain? That is not, I never really completely understand beyond, last rites. What does a chaplain do in a healthcare setting? And also, what role can faith play in the end of life experience?
Thank you, Amy, for your question. So it is a myth that, chaplains usually come in right before end of life, but the wonderful thing and understanding is that we really work with an interdisciplinary team before end of life. And what I feel as chaplains, we are the container of what the patient would like. And what that really means is we try to make an assessment based on their goals of care, based on story, based on the narrative of how they have lived their life and how they would like to depart from this life, and make sure that that happens. And so all the medical information I gather to make sure that we're making sure we're honoring the person the way they want to be honored. And then we set the environment and we set the stage specifically for these moments to happen. It's within that time that we make a spiritual assessment based on a couple of things. This assessment is really one to see if the person has a faith. If they do not, that is fine. We are interfaith. We believe that all people are connected in some way. And so we try to honor the ways in which people would like to be connected to their faith or spirituality if they choose so. Then we help to see if what is important to them. So for example, if someone's specific to be there specifically with them, we make sure that we coordinate and do the logistics that those people that they would like to have around them are there. And what's so important about this chaplain role is because everyone's doing their job. And so this container space that I try to hold for patients, inpatient and outpatients, are to make sure that all the things that they have in this plan that's important to have before end of life actually occurs. We make sure that the community is involved if they would like the community to know and what words they would like to be said in their obituary and beyond, working with funeral homes. And then lastly, we make sure that the family who is still here remaining has bereavement care. That's probably one of the top things that I do is I provide grief counseling and also make sure that they know, specifically in the state of Illinois, there are a lot of free support groups to upgird and uphold families who are trying to figure out what the next step is after their loved one has departed. Their services, and we've really seen that in the midst of COVID, people's not necessarily their faith has been shaken, but just their whole notion of grief and what grief really is has been shaken to the core. And so the beauty of the pandemic, we can say, is that there are a lot of options on Zoom now. And so people don't have to drive to get support, but they actually can just log on like we're doing tonight, having this wonderful discussion to connect with others who have gone through the same thing, to connect with mental health professionals, also to get the help that they're needing. And then lastly, I help to stage a container where we can have memory making. And what memory making is, those last moments prior to the person departing, making their transition, we create memories. Memories can come from photography, memories can come from stories that they share, and we try to make sure in these moments that they're sacred. I'm the container at that specific part where I kind of ask the physicians and nurses to kind of leave the space, or those who are providing medical care, and only come in as needed, so that the family can really have time together with their loved one. And for a lot of people, for their end of life, that is very important for them. And if we've had a plan, then I also am able and have the honor to share with the family some words that the person who is dying has said, to share with them, or to give some remarks on their behalf. So yeah, that's really honestly what a chaplain does. It's a lot of container work, as I call it, and it's less praying and blessing and rituals, though we do that. That's on the other end of the spectrum, but it's really making sure that at the end of life and in the in-between, that they have the resources and tools they need, and that the family has the tools they need after the fact is over.
Well, I learned a lot already. So this was my lifelong learning moment, because I didn't know any of those roles. And it really sounds like you do a lot of the sort of interdisciplinary kind of pulling together also of resource and support, which is so critical in our healthcare system, that we have that. Very, very impressed by the work that you're doing, and thank you. I want to remind the people who are listening, if you have questions, you might want to start to think about putting them in the Q&A, because we will have coming up a Q&A period. I gotta be honest, we may not have time for everyone, but let's see if you have any questions and see if we can get to them. I'd like to, if it's okay, just throw this open to everyone on the panel and have you just jump in. What role can family and loved ones play at the end of life, both positive and maybe not as positive? And what advice would you give to reduce conflict and uncertainty during that time? Who would like to go first? Just go like this. I'll see you. All right, Eric, it's you.
I'll go first. Without trying to be negative about it, I will mention, when somebody is about to pass away that everybody loved or didn't love, maybe they were irritating to you, but someone you cared about, emotions are always running very high. And if you have a tendency to have a little bit of conflict with your sibling under normal circumstances, during that time, when emotions are heightened, that impulse to be upset and angry and get into a conflict is even more. So I think probably the best advice I could give to family members is this is the time to dig deep, to show compassion, not only towards the sibling that might be irritating you, but remember that you're causing pain to the person that you're there to support by having that conflict. And I unfortunately see a lot of situations where a lasting conflict is started at that point that then lasts far after the person died. Sibling relationships that are no longer sibling relationships, or that they no longer get along because of a conflict that came about in that moment. And so I think for family, that's really important, to just kind of think through whether it's really worth it at that point. And try to let things go and get along.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that and know from which you speak. Reverend Dr. Bell and Dr. Williams, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I think, the critical importance of forgiveness, just like Eric said, I can't tell you how many children, family members of adults that I'm caring for, it's really hard for them sometimes. They sometimes are in a situation where they're choosing care for their loved one, and oftentimes making the choices out of guilt or out of anger because of things that have happened 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or feeling like, oh, I wasn't there enough, I need more time. It really, end of life is a time to really and truly be able to just love on someone, realize that for as long as they're still there, they still have the opportunity for you and them to express forgiveness to one another. And it really is about honoring who that individual is in front of you, and not letting all of the baggage of 15 years ago or 20 years ago interfere. It's amazing a lot of what comes out, in conversations with family members. And it really is just loss. They're grieving before the person is gone because of things that have happened in the past. So just as Eric said, let go.
I really appreciate that. I think end of life, being with someone at the end of life can be a tremendous opportunity to show love and to let go and to heal in a way that can be quite profound. And often, I think when somebody is at end of life, they may be more open also to those kinds of conversations. And if you can do that with love and compassion, it can be very powerful. So I really thank you both. Reverend Dr. Bell, do you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation?
Not only, I definitely agree. I think the only thing I would add is to really, for everyone to just have empathy for each other. As Attorney Park and Dr. Williams both said, emotions are running high. A lot of times people are bringing in their own emotion and their own things of what happened in the past. And so it's really, really vital for people in the family to be clear about who is the decision maker, right? Who was going to make the decisions on behalf of the person. And then also to have this a time of sharing, and not it to be about you, but to be about the person, and to make sure that though you might not agree with what they have decided, that you respect and you honor what they have decided to do. And so practicing empathy with each other is vital, specifically in that time period.
Yeah, and that gets back to me to the fact that the person, when they're doing planning before being in the ICU, before getting the diagnosis, can do so much to support the person who's going to be speaking for them in making decisions, by letting all the people know, even the ones they know are going to have a hard time with death and want to maybe be the ones who make the decisions or have their own really strong views on how death should be, and make sure they really understand, I'm asking you to support this. I'm asking you to support this person and my wishes. And I did just want to say, I statements can make a real difference in those conversations. So thank you so much. I did want to ask, and you don't have to feel like you have to answer this, but are there any resources that you would recommend for people who want to, engage in planning now for the end of life, and things that they might want to consider? Raise your hand or jump in. Okay.
Dr. Williams, you look like you were ready to go. Do you want to go first?
Well, I was just going to share that, definitely I encourage most people to look at your state laws and try to get a sense for what is an appropriate document and accept it within your individual state, as far as advanced directives like the living will form and the power of attorney form. Sometimes it's nice to use documents that you're able to just sit down and evaluate what are some of your wishes and what are some of your values, and take that worksheet into a doctor's visit. 5 wishes is one that I use in that format a lot, because it asks questions about, who are you, what's important to you, what kind of care is important to you versus not. So any way that you can do some of the homework prior to a discussion with your physician or your attorney as you do documentation of some of these directives, that's the most important thing.
That's great. Eric, I think you had some comments as well.
I do. So, the first thing I'll mention is you may want to visit the Compassion and Choices website, and Amy can be a good resource on some of the things that they offer. But I can tell you that if you're sorting through the process of what kind of care you would want or not want. They have a lot of good resources for that, to look at those issues. They also have a dementia tool that for people who are, facing a diagnosis of dementia, they can go through some discussion and question and answer that you can do online that allows you to contemplate what kind of care you would want and how much care based on how far you are along in the disease. It's really a great tool that you can use to kind of specify, if I get to the point where I can't remember my family members, would I still want X, Y, and Z treatments, or would I not want those treatments any longer? Really helps you think through some things. So that's really good. As far as powers of attorney go, I have to mention that there are any number of agencies that can help you with it. Your local area agency on aging will help you fill it out. Don't feel like if you can't afford a lawyer, you don't get to have a power of attorney. You absolutely should. But it is good to do it with someone who knows how to fill out the form. If you go to the Illinois Department on Aging website, it'll tell you where your local area agency on aging is. And then there are lots of other agencies that will do it with you. And I'll also mention, if you get to the point of doing a will and you truly can't afford a lawyer, there's a website called freewill.com, which you can also link to from the Compassion and Choices website. And it really does a pretty decent job of doing a basic will. I obviously want everyone to use a lawyer because I know that we're very complete and everything else, but rather than have people not have a will, it's something you could check out. That always leads to the question of, how do I know if I need a lawyer? I usually tell people, if you have a piece of real estate that you own, or you've got $100,000 or more in cash, definitely worth the money. You could be looking at anywhere from, up to maybe $800 per person to do wills and powers of attorney. So, I mean, it's an investment, but it's not a massive investment. There are complex things you could need that cost more. It's important to know that. But the basics are not outrageously expensive when you're talking about who's going to get your house. So.
Thank you. And we're going to talk more about resources after the Q&A period, because we will be following up with some resources. But let's shift now. I see there's a bunch of questions, and since we have a little extra time, I think we should use it that way, if that's all right. And I'd ask my colleague, Karen Retzer, who is our Midwest campaign organizer, to curate the questions. So I'm going to ask you to take it away, Karen.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I have several questions here that I will ask. One is perhaps for Reverend Dr. Bell. Can you comment on the role of a death doula? How do you work at all with death doulas, and how are they, different from what you do or the same?
That's a wonderful question. And so at end of life, specifically, a lot of people have decided to have a death doula to be a part of their transition team. And that's really to start that holding of container process to make sure that during those moments, everything that they would like and the goals of care that they would like and they would not like are actually being respected. But not only that, it's also to really help to flesh out the narrative. Working with death doulas, and I have before, specifically at end of life, it's really a wonderful partnership, if they're faith-based or not faith-based, to even understand what they want to happen after the fact. Do they want a funeral? Do they want to be cremated? How do they want to be celebrated? In what way? And even what specific words do they want to be printed? How do they want to share with the community in their passing. And so death doulas do a lot in the community aspect of that work with the patient and their family, in hospice situations and nursing homes and even in private care. Whereas as chaplains, we also do it within the hospital setting. Specifically, I do myself if I'm in the hospital setting, but we all work together to make sure that the one who is dying is being respected, being honored, and that their wishes are met at the end of their transition.
I wanted to add, we recently did a program on death doulas where we had a panel of death doulas just talking about what they do. If anybody's interested, I know we have a recording of that. We'll have to figure out where it is, but we'd be happy to share it because I think it is a really interesting, evolving, and it's been around for a long time, but an evolving role. So, all right, Karen, next
Absolutely.
question, please.
The next question is one that comes up frequently, and I know it's on the minds of a lot of people. I think it will probably be for Eric first of all, but the others to chime in. And that is, what suggestions do you have for a single person living alone without close family? And I'm thinking about this, Eric, in terms of, you know, advanced directives and proxies and whatnot, but this really is a question for everybody.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that more in my practice as well. As people are living longer, it's not all that unusual for people to outlive family and friends, and that can pose some real difficulties. One thing to keep in mind is that the agent that you name under a power of attorney doesn't have to be a family member. It doesn't have to be a spouse. It can be a close friend. It can be anybody that you trust to make the right decisions for you at the time. And so I do have lots of clients that have selected a friend, neighbor, someone they're close with who shares their values to be that person. And that can be great. If you don't have any of those options, there are people who will act as a power of or agent under a power of attorney for healthcare or finances for you, and they do that professionally. Geriatric care managers often do that, and there are some agencies that also do that work. You should know that they charge for their services. And so that's the downside, is there's an expense associated with that. But if you don't have anybody else, that is an option that you can pursue. And there is some planning that you can do even without naming an agent. For example, Dr. Williams mentioned a living will, which is a statement in advance that you wouldn't want certain treatments if the time comes. And it doesn't involve the decision of an agent to, make that call. So there are still things you can do to prepare in advance.
Great. Do the others want to talk about this at all, or shall we move on?
The only other issue that comes up is a lot of the times we get individuals with cognitive impairment who haven't done this preparation in advance. And sometimes at that point, we have to get the state involved for a state appointed guardian to be an advocate for the individual to help make choices that are in their best interest. So that's why it's so important for people when they're in a good state of health to just be clear about who they want to make decisions and what kind of care they do or don't want.
Right. Another question is more of a statement that some might want to comment on. Sometimes it's important and appropriate to give permission to leave to your loved one who is near death, reassuring them that you will be all right, and so that will they. Does somebody want to comment on this comment? I see Dr. Williams and Reverend Dr. Bell nodding their heads.
Dr. Bell, would you like to go first?
All right, there's been a number of times and cases that I can think of where the patient has said or has told us either verbally or with body language that it was time. And not only did they acknowledge it, but the family themselves also honored it and said, it's okay, we are here, you can go, we are surrounding you, and are actually talking about the process as is actually happening. And that has been a wonderful way for families kind of to connect and to really hone in on why they're there as their loved one is dying, but also to create that sacred moment, whether you have faith or not, and to be in that space. And that's why it's so critical before one gets to that point to really say who they would like to be around, who they do not want to be around, which I saw that was a question, and that is okay. You absolutely can say that you do not want this person to be there, or you do not want this person, or you do. And that's important for people to say, so that at those last moments before that person's death, that they're being honored and respected in those moments.
And I know that you mentioned that it's okay to say who you do not want to have around. Another question that came up in very related to that is it okay to say who you do not want to have as your healthcare power of attorney?
So important.
Right.
So important. Because, you know, it depends on what state you live in. Very often, if people haven't appointed someone, it may be a next of kin who's someone who doesn't know you very well, or someone who has a totally different philosophy about life and death than you do. So it is very important to state who you trust and who can advocate for you best. It is more than okay to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a comment on that one too, if you want.
Go ahead, Eric. Yes.
I was just going to say, you know, I haven't seen somebody write into a power of attorney that they're excluding a particular person. But usually when you fill out a power of attorney and specify who you do want, that is sufficient. However, there are documents you can fill out in advance to say people that you do or do not want to visit you towards the end of life, one of which is available through Compassionate Choices. But I would also say, just to emphasize what Dr. Williams said, if you do not decide, if you do not prepare a power of attorney, the state actually within its statutes has a scheme that says who the doctors are supposed to turn to. So for example, if you're married, it's typically your spouse. If you are not married, they typically turn to your child, and so on and so forth down the line. But absent that document, the state scheme may appoint somebody that you didn't choose that won't make the right decision. And so and not only that, even though it may say your children, and you're okay with that, if it doesn't specify which one, you may have a situation where your children don't agree, which is one of those things that winds us up in court sometimes. So definitely better to specify.
Thank you. I have a question that is in a state such as Illinois that prohibits medically assisted dying, medical aid in dying. One choice people have is to stop eating and drinking. We call this VSED, voluntarily stopping of eating and drinking. I wonder if this is a painful experience and difficult to do. And wondering if somebody on the medical side could give some insight into this.
Very often, as people go from life to death, they go through an experience of needing much less as far as fluids, much less as far as nutrition. It's the natural process with our body. And very often people do get to a point where they stop eating and drinking. They do it oftentimes voluntarily, or it may be because of their physical condition as they're going from life to death. So what I try to encourage family members to realize is they're not in any way attempting to starve themselves. They're doing what their body can tolerate at that period in time. And some people do voluntarily choose to do it in order to go from life to death in a peaceful way. And very often people do not experience pain because of it. They don't experience the traditional thirst that you or I would, who are up, moving about and doing things on a regular basis because they have gotten to the point where their bodies are much less active and requiring much less of the energy and the nutrients than we would. So very often they go off into a peaceful death when they stop eating and drinking. It's not painful. They're not experiencing the symptoms that you or I would of dehydration.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. One question is from somebody out in a different state from Illinois, wondering if Compassion and Choices is in other states, and this is a national organization. We will be sharing with you all a document with websites and other resources after this event. So if you're here from another state, rest assured that we are in other areas. We will let you know about that. Looking through. I'm looking. Is the question for Dr. Williams, whether you're considered a primary care doctor or a specialist?
Oddly enough, both. In my role as geriatrics, I practice as a primary care geriatrician within the University of Chicago system, but I also practice in University of Chicago as a specialist for palliative medicine on the inpatient side.
Okay. Thank you. A question that is asking if medical aid in dying is part of what Compassion and Choices does. The question, or works towards for advocating. The question is actually worded as assisted suicide, but we call this, it is not suicide. This is medical aid in dying. And so I'm wondering if somebody would like to talk about that. Amy, yes.
That's what I do for a living. Yes, I'll talk about it. One of the things we do, Compassion and Choices, we have several areas of focus. One of them is working to authorize medical aid in dying as one option for those who are terminally ill. They have to be adults. They have to be mentally capable of making a decision. It has to be entirely voluntary, both for the person who is dying and for the provider. There's a lot on our website about it. I do want to say we do other things as well. As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to focus on have people having the full menu of options. Unfortunately, in Illinois, medical aid in dying is not on the menu yet. It's something that we're working toward. If somebody wanted to get involved in advocacy with us, please contact, and we'll have our contact information at the end. Karen or myself will be happy to work with you on that. But I think, also reason we do this program is because it's not only just about medical aid in dying, it's also important to be thinking about advanced care planning and dementia planning and inequities. All of these issues are very important to us. But thank you for the question, because it's always nice to be able to talk about that. I think it might be time to wrap up. Karen, thank you so much for questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but I always think that's a good sign of a program. And maybe one day we'll just do a Q&A program with a bunch of people, and we'll do it that way. But I do want to ask if we could put the slides up. And just wrap up at this point. Thank you so much, panelists. You're fabulous. I look forward to continuing to work with you to keep the discussion going. We were mentioning resources, and Attorney Eric talked about Plan Your Care Resource Center that we have. It's busy, but it's phenomenal. I mean, you'll have to go through and spend some time hitting on some links, but it's got pretty much everything you need in terms of that kind of advanced care planning for end of life. One of the things we want to highlight is the end of life decisions guide. This is something we will be, by the way, sending links on all these resources to you, anyone who's registered in the next week or two in follow up to this. And also the dementia values and priority tool. These are just wonderful planning documents. So I know for myself, when I started to put my advanced directives together, I just didn't even know what I wanted. So how could I document my wishes when I didn't know what my wishes were? That was a little bit of an issue. I think that's true for a lot of people. And that end of life decisions guide really helps you think more about your values and priorities and what you want, so that you're really ready to then move to the next phase about documenting your wishes. The diagnosis decoder is really one of my favorite tools that we have. We have one for dementia, we have one for cancer, and we have a general one. And this is for when you have a diagnosis or a loved one has a diagnosis and you're getting ready to meet with the doctor or the specialist. And it provides a list of questions based on your goals, and you can opt in or opt out to those questions and add your own questions, create a compilation of the questions, and even then email it to the provider. I am sure doctors appreciate that, so they can get ready and know what your questions are. So I think that's a great way to reduce anxiety. I know for me, if I get a diagnosis, I tend to go kind of blank screen. It's hard to think at that moment. This really helps with that. I'd like to now turn this over actually to our partner, Rachel Murphy, to talk from Chicago Public Library, just briefly about what resources people can expect at the library.
Sure. Hi, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So yes, my name is Rachel. I'm a librarian that works with adult services here at the Chicago Public Library. And libraries are actually great places to access books and other resources that may be helpful for your planning journey. We're a large library system, so we actually have a lot of items in our collection. After this program, in the follow-up email, you'll get a link with a resource list that I made with some more recent resources, including links to external websites that are librarian recommended, like Illinois Legal Aid and the Illinois Department of Families and Aging. They have resource guides as well for things that you may want to consider as you're planning for your comfortable end. If you are a visitor of libraries, if you like going to libraries and you're not sure what you're looking for, libraries have reference staff like librarians and other staff that can help you find what you're looking for. And we can have it, sent to the library that you wish to pick it up at. There's a lot of things accessible to you for free through your public library. If you're not a Chicago resident, like if you're in the suburbs or if you're somewhere else in the state, or even if you're out of state, I recommend finding your local public library. Usually you can easily find that through a Google search. I would just look for your city, your state, and then public library, and something should pop up to kind of guide you there if you don't already know it. But in general, libraries and librarians can help you get the resources that you're interested in, even if they don't have it in their collection. We have ways to get them for you.
Thank you so much. As a lifelong love of libraries that I have, I don't want to say this because it probably will make you mad, but it was my babysitter and was my activity. But I really appreciate the work you do. Next slide, please. I just want to highlight a few events that are coming up, and one of them is at the library. But at the end of the month, on the 26th and 27th, for those of you who are really passionate and want to do more around the end-of-life option movement, we will be doing our Train the Advocate workshop. We do these quarterly. It's on the 26th and 27th. They're half-day sessions. So you get a real feel for the work at Compassion and Choices. You do need to be a volunteer. And you can see the link below that if you want to write it down, it'll tell you right where you need to go to sign up for that. We also have something happening at the library, and this is going to be our first branch offering, but we've been working closely with Rachel, who's a wonderful partner, to be able to put together workshops around advanced care planning at various branches, and we're kicking it off at North Austin branch on February 9th. If this is something that interests you, it's 2 to 3, let us know. Everyone is welcome. We are also, for those of you who are interested in working more, thinking about more clinical approaches and wanting to get involved on, this is virtual, it's an end-of-life symposium. Compassionate Choices is going to be very much engaged in this at the City of Hope, which is a very well-known cancer center and provider. And that's going to be virtual. That's February 7th through 5th through the 7th, excuse me, from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Again, you can get that from the link below. And then finally, we're doing for the Midwest a screening of Living and Dying: A Love Story, which is a beautiful film of this couple that had been married for a really long time, who decided to opt for medical aid in dying. And what will make this a very special event is the filmmaker, who's the daughter, is going to be there and talking afterwards. So that's on March 2nd at 5 p.m. There's always tons going on. So hope that you will check our event page. Make sure to scroll down past the calendar. And next slide, please. I just, here's our contact information, Karen and myself, and I wish in a way we had Rachel's, but we'll get you to Rachel if you need it, and to any of the panelists, actually. I just really wanted to thank people for hanging in, staying with us for the hour. I hope you got something from it. I know I did. And I really want to thank the panelists. I want to thank, Dr. Williams, who I know was rushing to get here from her work, and Reverend Dr. Bell, who was doing the same, and Eric Parker, who was also doing the same. I mean, these are busy people, and they took this time, and I think, serve really a higher purpose in their work. And I just can't thank you enough. I'm grateful to you. I want to thank Rachel, who's become one of our very favorite partners, and we're very excited about what this collaboration with the library can bring as a learning center. So we're thrilled. And I also want to thank the team, Karen and Patrick, who is hiding behind the logo. Thank you so much for making this program happen. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. We will be making sure to get you links to resources, ways to connect, all of that in an email, along with a recording of the event. So give us some time, because we have to get the recording worked out. But I would think probably next week you will have this, and please feel free to share it with people you know. And we hope you will get engaged, and we hope you will plan, and you will communicate and document and take care of yourselves. So have a lovely evening. Thanks, everyone. Take care.